I'm Yu Sun, a doctoral candidate at Pennsylvania State University. My research interests include educational history, research university, and post-World War II social science. Today, I'm going to talk about history that the American Sociological Association tried to establish its own institutional archives. My topic is Archive at Sympoiesis, the absence of university partnership of the ASA's archivization in the 1970s. What are archives? The word itself refers to both the records and the repository, while this study emphasized the latter. Archives are the places for the storage of documents and records, and the site of knowledge production for history and social research. Given the importance of original records, going to the archives is the statement of a tacit law of history. Scholars demonstrated on the centrality of the archive of both the scholarly enterprise and the existence of democratic society. Although there are some scholars prize the archives assuring concreteness, objectivity, recovery, and wholeness, archivization was essentially very prejudiced. The production of archive collections contained multiple political dynamics and power relationships, which means it is sympoiesis. Sympoiesis, this word, means making with, and it refers to complex, dynamic, responsive, situated, and historical systems, which is influenced by multiple dynamics and power relations. The prejudice was relevant to the selection of archives. Archivization as a process of knowledge production legitimized what counts as knowledge and what are appropriate objects of study in specific disciplines. Knowledge was shaped by the way it is transmitted and archived. To examine political significance of archives, scholars took critical approaches such as regarding archives as subjects as well as source. This is what this study will do. We are regarding the ASA archives as a subject as well as our resource. Given that the establishment of an disciplinary archive could be a sympoiesis influenced by multiple powers and political dynamics, who are the actors in these dynamics? University, government, foundations, professional associations. So, as an educational researcher, this study intends to explore the role of universities in disciplinary archives. Let's first look at some disciplinary archives in the US. The Archives of American Psychological Association was archived by Library of Congress and the University of Akron. The Archives of American Historical Association was preserved by Library of Congress and Gutenberg E-Program. Also, the American Council of Learned Society and Social Science Research Council have their repositories respectively. Among all these academic institutions, I identified a very particular case of the American Sociological Association because it has a very sharp watershed in its history of preservation. Before 1992, the institutional archive of the ASA was stored by Library of Congress, which is a governmental branch. And after 1992, the American Sociological Association archive was preserved by the Pennsylvania State University, which is a university. What happened? Why were the ASA archives preserved previously by a governmental branch and later by a university? So Table 1 provides a basic chronology of the ASA archives. We can see that the first time advocacy for an organizational archive of the ASA happens in 1950, which is brought up by Matilda White Riley, who is the executive officer of ASA at that time. And the second time advocacy happened in 1966 by Ohio Valley Sociological Society. What attracted my attention is during 1970s, there are very multiple advocacy for archives, like the ad hoc committee of archives established by President William Hamilton Sewell, and also the collaboration with the Library of Congress. But it is not until 1983 that ASA began deliver its records. So what happened during these years must be very significant. The Page Committee on the Feasibility of Archives was established by the ASA President Sewell. He, on November 19, 1970, appointed the ASA Committee on Archives, which includes Robert Ferris, Jesse Bernard, Polly Grimshaw, and Charles Page as the chairman. The mission of this committee is to explore how could ASA find a repository for its institutional archives. The work of this committee encountered many difficulties, such as lack of funding, no opportunity to meet with each other, and also the ignorance of their final report. But finally, they produced a report on the feasibility of archives, which is very interesting because the final report reads that the archive should be located at the ASA headquarters, which didn't follow the collegiate tradition which established an archive in collaboration with any university. Why didn't Page Committee suggest collaboration with any university? Because they brought up many concerns went with the university partnership, such as getting university approval of such an arrangement, financial support to build up and maintain archives requires some ASA support, adequate staffing, as Bob knows, a deeply interested person would be needed, and also physically remoteness from the ASA headquarters. Such concerns stopped the committee from considering cooperation with any university special collection. Why are these concerns very severe with ASA archives than the other professional association? There are two examples of problematic university partnership previously. One is in 1935, there was a rebellion of the ASA against Chicago. And the second is Page's personal experience, his difficult editorship in Smith College. These two complicated experiences strengthens Page's concern going with any university partnership in archivization. After Page's report, the Library of Congress brought up cooperation. 2 years later, in 1974. The archivist of library of Congress, whose name is Paul Heffron, exchanged many correspondences with the AISA's executive officer Otto Larsen. The AISA responded very positively toward this cooperation with Library of Congress, and they promised to provide an $1,000 grant for this archive repositories. But the cooperation was delayed for 9 years because of discrepancy on the instrument of gift. After comparing the instrument of gift of the AISA and of the APA, the AISA executive officer Larsen decided that the current instrument of gift didn't provide the AISA's privacy very tightly. So he proposed to revise it, but this revision delayed the cooperation between these two institutions, and finally, the material delivery was delayed. AISA finally began its delivery of records on 1983. The following 9 years, from 1983 to 1992, is maybe the most peaceful years for the AISA archives. The records, but unfortunately, on 1992, the Library of Congress stopped accessing many professional associations' records in that year, such as AISA and APA. Given the Library of Congress de-accessed AISA archives, the AISA has to find another repository. After long discussions and arguments, finally AISA found a new repository in Pennsylvania State University. The cooperation continues till now. From the history of the AISA archives, we can clearly see there are some differences between the cooperation with Library of Congress as a governmental branch and cooperation with Penn State as a university. This is demonstrated as the controversy between two different archiving traditions, the historical manuscript tradition and the public archives tradition. Table 2 provided a comparison between these two traditions. We can see that the historical manuscript tradition, rooted in librarianship, and it defines the core function of archives as research and defines the role of archivists as historians and interpreter. To the contrary, the public archives tradition define the core function of archives as provenance and define the role of archivist as administrator and custodian. Currently, we could provide a very rough dichotomy that most private and research-oriented institutes like colleges and universities takes the historical manuscript tradition, and mainly public and archiving-oriented institutions like National Archives, the SAA, and Library of Congress took the public archives tradition. So, what tradition works better with the ASA archives? Clearly, we could see that ASA, the American Sociological Association, as a professional archives, carries more research and service functions, which is very similar to a university. Rather than a government branch. That is why the ASA archives works better with the historical manuscript tradition than the public archives tradition. By and large, archiving as a preservation of social history and also as an institutionalization of knowledge is a sympoiesis which is influenced by power dynamics among different actors such as university, government, and professional associations. The lesson from the ASA archives history is that professional association could use university partnership as an interinstitutional resource to preserve their institutional records. Archives of an academic association works better with a collegiate repository than a governmental repository.